300,000 years ago? You were not alone. At least 8 other human species walked this planet at the same time as us. Some were stronger, some had bigger brains. Some had survived for over 1 million years before we even existed. Today, every single one of them is gone. Only one species is left standing, us. In the next few minutes, you'll find out exactly how the other humans on Earth were wiped out, one by ice, fire, hunger, and each other, and why, out of 9 known human species, only Homo sapiens made it to the other side. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never look at the word human the same way again, and you'll understand exactly how close our own species came to disappearing right alongside all the others. And if stories like this pull you in, this is exactly what this channel is built on, so make sure you're subscribed before we start. Let's set the scene properly, because most people get this completely wrong. Humans did not evolve in a straight line, one version slowly turning into the next, like some kind of assembly line. That's not what happened. For most of our history, multiple human species lived on Earth at the exact same time, often on the same continents, sometimes in the same valleys. Homo erectus was walking through Asia for close to 2 million years. Homo neanderthalensis was hunting across Europe. The Denisovans were spread through Siberia and parts of Asia, known mostly from a single finger bone and a few teeth. Homo floresiensis, a tiny human standing barely over 3 feet tall, lived on an isolated island in Indonesia. Homo naledi, with a brain the size of an orange, was burying its dead in deep cave systems in South Africa, and somewhere in the middle of all of this chaos, a new species appeared in East Africa around 300,000 years ago. Homo sapiens, us, the new kid on the block. For most of that time, we were not the most impressive species in the room. Neanderthals had bigger brains than we did. Their bodies were built like tanks, thick bones, powerful muscles, adapted for generations to brutal Ice Age cold. They controlled fire. They made tools. They buried their dead with what looks like genuine ritual and grief. If you had to bet on which species would still be around in 300,000 years, a reasonable person in that era might not have picked us. So what actually happened? The honest answer is that no single event killed off the other human species. It was a slow collision of several forces hitting at once, and once you understand each one, the ending stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling almost inevitable. The first force was climate. Earth, during this period, was not stable. It was swinging wildly between brutal ice ages and short warm periods, sometimes flipping in the space of a single human lifetime. Ice sheets crawled down over Europe, swallowing entire ecosystems. Forests turned to tundra. The animals that Neanderthals depended on for food, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, either died off or migrated somewhere new. Neanderthals were ambush hunters. They were built for close combat with large, slow prey in dense terrain. When that terrain disappeared, their entire survival strategy collapsed with it. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, had spent generations in the unpredictable climate of Africa, a place where the rules changed constantly and only the most adaptable groups survived. We didn't have the strongest bodies. We had the most flexible ones. And flexibility turned out to matter more than raw strength when the world itself became the enemy. The second force was volcanic. Around 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano named Toba erupted in what is now Indonesia. It was one of the most violent eruptions in the last 2 million years. Ash was thrown so high into the atmosphere that it circled the entire planet. Sunlight dimmed for years. Global temperatures dropped. Some researchers believe this event pushed the entire human population, all species combined, down to dangerously low numbers, possibly just a few thousand breeding individuals worldwide. Whole populations of Homo erectus in Asia may have been erased almost overnight. It didn't matter how tough you were, how sharp your spear was, or how well you understood your territory. A sky full of ash doesn't care about any of that. This was the first hint that intelligence, cooperation, and the ability to adapt fast were about to become worth more than physical power ever was. The third force was competition for resources, and this one is uncomfortable because it involves us directly. As Homo sapiens spread out of Africa, roughly 60 to 70,000 years ago, we didn't move into empty land. Neanderthals were already living across Europe and the Middle East. Denisovans already occupied parts of Asia. For thousands of years, these populations overlapped. They shared hunting grounds, water sources, caves, and territory. And where resources are limited, competition eventually becomes conflict. There is no single smoking gun, no ancient battlefield covered in bones that historians point to and say, this is where it happened. Instead, what we see is something slower and in some ways more brutal. A gradual squeeze. Homo sapiens arrived in larger social groups, coordinated over longer distances, and passed down knowledge more efficiently across generations. Even a slight edge in cooperation, repeated over thousands of years and thousands of encounters, adds up to something enormous. It doesn't take one dramatic war to erase a species. It just takes losing slightly more often than you win for long enough. Now here's the part that surprises almost everyone, including people who think they already know this story. We didn't just outcompete the Neanderthals and Denisovans, we absorbed them. When scientists mapped the human genome, they found something nobody expected. Most people with ancestry outside of Africa carry somewhere between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA. People from parts of Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA as well, in some populations reaching 4 to 6%. This means Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just live near each other. They had children together. Real families, real relationships, spanning thousands of years and countless generations. Some of that Neanderthal DNA still shapes you today. It affects immune response. It affects how some people's skin reacts to sunlight. It's even been linked to sleep patterns and pain tolerance in modern humans. In a very real, biological sense, the Neanderthals never fully disappeared. They live on, scattered in fragments, inside almost every non-African person alive right now. So if they didn't completely vanish, what actually happened to them as a distinct species? The honest scientific picture is a slow fade rather than a single ending. Small, scattered Neanderthal populations kept shrinking as climate swings hit them again and again. Interbreeding pulled individuals into the much larger and faster-growing sapiens population. Disease may have played a role too. Since two species meeting for the first time in tens of thousands of years would have been swapping pathogens their immune systems had never encountered before. Piece by piece, generation by generation, the population that could still be called purely Neanderthal simply got smaller, until one day, roughly 40,000 years ago, there weren't enough of them left to keep going. Homo floresiensis, the tiny island humans nicknamed the hobbits by the archaeologists who found them, held on far longer than almost anyone expected, possibly until around 50,000 years ago on their isolated island. Being cut off from the mainland had protected them from a lot of the pressure hitting other species, but eventually even that isolation ran out, likely due to a mix of volcanic activity on the island and the eventual arrival of modern humans. Homo naledi remains one of the strangest cases in this entire story. Its exact timeline is still debated, but what we do know is unsettling in its own way. A species with a brain roughly a third the size of ours was carrying its dead deep into pitch-black cave systems, navigating passages so narrow that modern researchers have to specifically hire small-bodied cavers just to reach the site. Nobody fully understands why. but it tells us something important. The instinct to treat death as something meaningful, something worth ritual and effort, might not be uniquely human at all. It might be older and more widespread than we ever gave it credit for. The Denisovans deserve a moment of their own because their story is almost the opposite of every other species on this list. We don't know what they looked like. We don't have a skull, a full skeleton, or even a decent guess at their height. What we have is a single finger bone and a few teeth, found in a cold cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia back in 2010. When researchers extracted DNA from that tiny fragment of bone, they expected to find either a Neanderthal or an early sapiens. Instead, they found something else entirely, a third lineage of human that nobody had ever identified before, one that had been hiding in the genetic record the entire time. From that single bone, scientists eventually traced Denisovan DNA into living populations scattered across modern Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and parts of Tibet, thousands of miles from that one cold cave. An entire branch of humanity spread across half a continent, reduced in the fossil record to a fingertip. It's one of the strangest reminders in all of science that extinction doesn't always mean disappearance. Sometimes it just means becoming invisible until someone finally knows where to look. By around 40,000 years ago, the picture had changed completely. Homo erectus, the longest surviving human species in history, having endured for close to 2 million years, finally disappeared from its last refuges in Southeast Asia. The Denisovans faded not long after, leaving behind almost nothing but DNA and a handful of bone fragments. The hobbits of Flores were gone. And Homo sapiens stood alone, for the first time in the entire history of our genus, as the only human species left on the planet. Why us specifically? Strip away all the details and it comes down to a small number of advantages that seem minor individually, but became overwhelming when stacked together. We cooperated in larger groups than any other human species, sometimes numbering in the hundreds rather than small, isolated bands. We developed language complex enough to plan, to warn, to teach abstract ideas across generations, rather than just the present moment. We traded across long distances, moving materials and ideas between groups that had never even met each other. And critically, we were willing to change. When the climate shifted, we changed our tools. When prey disappeared, we changed our diet. When one valley stopped producing, we packed up and walked somewhere new instead of waiting to starve in familiar territory. Neanderthals were, in many ways, specialists, extraordinarily good at surviving in one specific type of world. We were generalists, mediocre at almost everything individually, but capable of surviving in nearly any world at all. And when the world itself became unstable, being a generalist stopped being a weakness and became the single greatest advantage any species could possibly have. There's something worth sitting with here before we wrap up. This wasn't really a story about one species being superior to another in some simple, satisfying way. It was a story about timing, about climate, about volcanoes nobody could have predicted, about which groups happened to be flexible enough at exactly the moment flexibility mattered most. If a handful of variables had landed differently, if Toba had erupted a little earlier, if the ice ages had shifted a different direction, you might not be watching this at all. Someone else might be. Something else might be. We are not the inevitable endpoint of evolution. We are the species that happened to be standing when the dust settled. And every single one of us alive today is descended from small groups of survivors who got lucky, adapted fast, and refused to stop moving. So the next time you look in a mirror, you're not just looking at a member of a species, you're looking at the last human species left out of at least 9, the only survivor of an extinction event that erased every other version of us that ever existed. If this kind of deep history is something you want more of, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next? And before you go, here's a question worth sitting with in the comments. If Neanderthals had survived instead of us, slower to spread but built for endurance and cold, do you think their world would have turned out anything like ours, or something completely different? Let me know what you think down below. That's it for this one. See you in the next video.